I was rather keen on this shirt until the post lady told me that it harked back to the 1980s. I suppose it's part of getting a little bit older that your fashion sense freezes, so you sometimes can cut a rather pathetic, out-of-date figure. However, whatever, I quite like it in a way, and will wear it at least around the house. I don't really want to impose it on the public. They deserve better. Anyway, today Starmer has resigned, and he did almost as becoming the obligatory action to blob in front of the cameras. I don't have much time for that. This man was fairly hard-arsed when he wanted to be, so this of tears doesn't cut much ice with me. Yes, of course, being able to cry with nobility is a different matter. They were ignoble tears, very much full of self-pity. Not real tears, but crocodile tears in a way. Politics is vicious, and so that he should somehow think that the events were unkind to him and how unfair everybody was. No, he did a very good job, really. It's B.S. The man was a complete and utter lemon. And now we have another man in who I think is an ideologue. So the theme of this off-the-cuff set of remarks, it's the first one for me to do it this way, is to do with where ideology came from, a little bit of history. Because it goes back, 400 or 500 years at least. The Age of Reason, which was very big in the 18th century, or I should say late 17th century really, 17th, 18th century, had a huge influence. But the philosophers thought they were very great free thinkers and liberating people with their theories, the likes of Leibniz, Descartes, Spinoza, and then you had empiricists who are in a way slightly smitten, but less so with the same problem, the likes of Locke, Berkeley, Hume. This supposed difference between the continental philosophers and the British or UK ones, British because Hume was involved too, of course, and Berkeley, isn't that great really, when you consider that they all shared a certain sort of philosophical arrogance. Philosophers like to be listened to, and listening, or I should say status, is a sign of how much someone is thought to be worth listening to. Status is a sort of aphrodisiac for a philosopher. It is to a lot of people otherwise. So anyway, in this age of reason, they thought they were being dreadfully reasonable, constructing what comes down to closed system theories. And all of them seem to point towards some kind of utopia, a sort of know-all attitude, that they're constructing these edifices of wisdom which would make reasoning or reason redundant. Because if this wonderful philosophical theory, Leibniz's or whoever's, is correct, then you don't need to use reason anymore because you have the theory. And it's quite enticing. In fact, they all had a problem with God. Religion had to be squared. Presenting a full-blown, thoroughly atheist philosophy was just a little bit too far for the time to be able to stomach. Spinoza's been accused of atheism, pantheism, or whatever, and indeed he was thrown out by his Jewish fraternity in a sort of form of excommunication. And he's never, even though he's long dead, attempts to reinstate him have been rebuffed. Spinoza was brilliant, there's no doubt about that, and he did try very hard to establish a streak of humanity in his philosophy, but it was axiomatic. Indeed, Wittgenstein later admired him for the axiomatic approach, And there are elements of the structure of Wittgenstein's Tractatus which are axiomatic. He numbers the axioms at the beginning in Roman numerals. The intense irony is, though I dislike Wittgenstein intensely, unwittingly, when I wrote my first little effort, which enraged the academics in the late 70s, called rather grandiosely The Object of Humanity, I used Roman numerals and a bunch of, they weren't really axioms, they were demonstrative observations, which is slightly different, to establish what I thought was the correct way, or the most useful way, to think philosophically, and more so to be able to establish, for instance, the difference between ethics and morals, and how understanding of the contradictory nature of society can give you a very good prompt, or at least foundation, for a wider political approach, good political approach to the nature of society. Something we're lacking today desperately. The still common contempt for democracy is rooted in the fact that no academic, to my knowledge, has taken democracy seriously enough to establish its preconditions, prerequisites for its existence. Things like the law of compromise, where the cost of compromise must always be less than the cost of non-cooperation. It's a very simple idea, but most strangely, academics don't find it very easy to talk about democracy. And that's because they're fixated on the idea everything has to be consistent. Well, yes, if you're arguing a point, that's quite important. But life is not consistent. Society isn't consistent. Culture isn't consistent. All of the intersubjective can tolerate inconsistency. Of course, there's also consistency in there. Law is intersubjective, and law by and large is consistent, but not always. You find laws, even they conflict. If you go into other aspects such as snobberies and class and caste distinctions and so on, and they're rampant with inconsistency. And of course, hypocrisy is, to a certain extent, a way of life. None of us are free of hypocrisy, although some are vastly more hypocritical than others. So anyone claiming that they've never been hypocritical is equivalent, as I did, and I was teased mercilessly for this when I was a little boy, claiming, oh, I'd never been proven wrong. You can imagine, they swarmed on me. What a delight for a bully. And yeah, of course I was asking for it. I didn't know, I was immature and they were more mature. These things happen. So anyway, we've got a situation now with an ideologue, a much more tramline ideologue than Keir Starmer, most likely becoming Prime Minister in the Labour Party, of course. Andy Burnham is, I think, very much more dangerous. I think he will precipitate a bond crisis, and when bills can't be paid, the government will have to either resort to rampant inflation, which will be politically disastrous, or it'll have to swallow its pride, and Labour Party people have to swallow their ideology and accept, in effect, rule by foreigners for a time until things get straight again. If that happens, it's almost certain what the foreigners will want will be very large percentage interest in our fracking resources and in the North Sea. We will in effect pay for profligacy by giving away what we failed to exploit, which would have stopped the necessity to give them away in the first place. Yeah, it's Miliband and Labour's ideological fixation in net zero. I'm not arguing that there might be a good point in carbon dioxide being a danger, but if you're going to do that to the extent that you lose the capacity to govern yourselves and foreigners in effect call the shots, then that's self-defeating in the most absolute sense. It's sort of almost, I was going to say criminally stupid, but what we're dealing with are ideologues who are artificially stupid. This is the thing about ideology, is it is a form of mental algorithm. I know Musk calls it a mental virus, but mental algorithm that gets into your thinking. So when you hear something, it churns away without you actually thinking about it and spits out opinions which are almost unconsciously voiced back. For instance, MPs in Parliament getting ferociously angry with maybe what Reform are saying. And their anger actually is really twofold. I heard this in another blog, so excuse me, I'm just sort of nicking it, this idea. The first thing is, yes, of course, it goes against the ideology, but what really gets them is the possibility that someone in Reform, or God forbid Restore, who they consider to be Nazis, without any idea of a real horror of the leather-coated people with vile insignia were really like, and we haven't got those here. But they think that we have that here. They're sort of cartoon characters in their imagination, in the ideology in their heads, and they sort of almost lose their minds. They certainly have no sense of humour, and they don't have the ability to engage with the opposition. It's rather like in war. You're certainly not allowed to engage with the enemy if you're a soldier. If you're someone right at the top of government, possibly, when you're knocking up a truce or an armistice or something, that's another matter. But by and large in war, you don't talk to the enemy. So they have a sort of quasi-military attitude which stems from ideology, and with that comes an almost inevitability of conflict. I think nearly all modern wars, certainly the Great War in the middle of the 20th century, not the First World War, but the Second World War particularly, was sparked by an ideological conflict on mainland Europe. And that was between A.H., we dare not speak his name, and Stalin. And what they were interested in initially, or Stalin was and Hitler, was getting rid of social democracy, which was a common enemy of ideology. All ideologues loathe democracy, because democracy exists to find out what to do. It accommodates and respects contradiction and the law of compromise, which is anathema to ideology. Anyway, once the social democracies were cleared out of the way, except for that pesky one in the United Kingdom, and later the giant in the United States, they thought they could then turn on each other to sort out who's going to be boss of a European continent, and possibly, in their fetid imagination, boss of the world. Certainly the Soviet Union, in the background of Stalin's mind, I think it still existed. World communism. Everyone's going to live in this utopia where the state is morally superior to normal people. And it's morally superior because, after all, normal people need to be looked after by this sort of giant big brother. And of course there'll be a few right at the top who will have a lovely time because they'll be doing the service of goodness. And so they'll require jet aeroplanes, luxury dachas and all the other goodies. Yeah, ideology can be a very dirty business. It's really a method of making people servile, removing their agency, and then the agency is accorded to abstractions like the people, the proletariat, the masses, and you had a sort of nasty, naughty people like the bourgeois, capitalist wreckers, and so on and so forth. So the ideological world is a world of fantasy battles between abstractions in people's heads, and it's designed to motivate and cause division. instead of making for a better society, the idea is instead is you remove or you re-educated, remove or kill anybody who gets in the way of ideological truth. It's not humanity. Ideology exists for its own sake, whereas humanity is an expression where individuals appreciate others who are like them and understand that there's a collective benefit of being as humane to others as you are to yourself. It's a sort of slightly Christian way of looking at it. And it is, I suppose, in a way, you could say it's tribal. Everyone's in the same tribe, we're all humans together, all that sort of thing. But if you look at the Marxism or the Marxist view, that isn't the case. Humanity is not big in that at all. Its adherence to political theory, to a deterministic theory, a theory that paints people little more as sort of material robots that respond to stimuli. And, you know, we're really a bunch of idiots that only react according to what we experience. And coming back to the Labour government and the Tory one who invented it, we have a thing called the nudge unit. And the nudge unit, in effect, the philosophy behind it is that little people don't have ability to make judgments in their own right. They only react to what's put into them, like a program. Rubbish in, rubbish out. Well, we get rid of the rubbish by destroying our culture and our society, and we put the good stuff in, and suddenly these people who are otherwise racists or whatever you want to call them suddenly become ideal citizens for the utopia to come, which will be framed by ideology, political theory, and of course by those brave, selfless, intelligent politicians who will interpret and implement the ideology, of course, for our own good. And if occasionally there are people who don't quite fit the awkward squad, well, you could lock them up, I suppose, give them a bit of intense re-education so they might turn the corner. Or in extreme, if they're really difficult, you kill them. History has a lot of examples of that. It's a very, very nasty scene. So anyway, in the 17th and 18th century, we're now going way back from where ideology existed, the predominant approach was of people who didn't understand the nature of reason. It sort of imprisoned them and forced them into the axiomatic way of producing theories about politics and society. Nice thing about an axiomatic theory is it's right by definition. It's rather a joy. And then ideology was really invented in the 19th century. Ideologues will claim that, Plato was ideological, or, the ancient Greeks were ideology went on forever. That is nonsense. Utter nonsense. Obviously, in those days, before Christ and after, there was a bunch of brutality and horror. It was a world dominated by religion and the brute and often cruel utilitarianism of conflict, war, and horror. On top, of course, of which were the natural disasters of famine, disease, plague, whatever. But it was only in the 19th century when ideology started to pop up. And what ideology did was it fed off the tradition which the Age of Reason philosophers had started out with, of producing theories which were closed system, axiomatic, and yet gave a sense of help people artificially believe or sense that the world, how to interpret the world, and how to make sense out of otherwise a really unpleasant environment. Voltaire, for instance, was sickened by Leibniz, the best of all possible worlds. This was the theory according to Leibniz. So if you see I don't know what, people dying in the streets, starvation, people having their hands and heads chopped off, what have you. Well, yeah, it's bad, but it's really quite good because it's the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire's Candide was written with that in mind. It was a highly radical book, and it was really, in effect, a criticism of the supposed rationalism of the Age of Reason. It wasn't rationalism, because if you look at reason, you'll understand that to be able to reason, one of the critical prerequisites is the ability to use logic. Now, logic is a closed system, so strictly speaking, you can't really relate it to reality at all. Of course, we all know we do it, and it can be done, but there's been very little thought about how we are enabled to use and understand logic. Because the law of non-contradiction, this is important, and please take your time to think about this. The law of non-contradiction is self-destructive. The word contradiction is self-destructive. Because, if you think about it, if contradiction is forbidden, then you can't really make sense out of it. Because, strictly speaking, the word contradiction is nonsensical. In other words, it's to be ignored. So, if you're trying to be 100% logical, you just freeze up. Because you can't understand how to use logic. If everything's consistent by definition, then what's the point of logic? What's the point of thinking? Ideologues would love it that way. It would just trundle along. There's no need for reason, which is exactly what happens. And that is why ideology is, in effect, lethal to reason. It's quite sobering, really. And also, of course, has a side effect that it strips individuals of agency. It doesn't really strip the agency, but in society, you are in effect forbidden to reason if you're going to be fully ideological. The most you can do is to point to the ideological handbook, whatever it is, the political text, the Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital, or whatever, and say, this is what it says. Interestingly, in Das Kapital, there's a remark, I think, in the chapter on the internal contradictions of capital. I think it's in section 1, I'm not certain, which remarks the following. This is feathered. Jews are feathered. Capitalists are feathered, inwardly circumcised Jews. It's quite sobering when you think about it. The defence of it, Marx was making a joke, Well, for a start, it's a pretty sick joke. But he wasn't really. Marx invented the ideology, and his works are brilliant, and they should be studied in detail, because there's no doubt Marx changed the history of the world. He was staggeringly important. But if you are an ideologue, and you're fixated on consistency, jokes aren't allowed in the ideology. It's the anti-Semitism, this sort of almost, unholy alliance of anti-Semites and Marxists is rooted in ideology's incapability to appreciate humour, handle contradiction, and consequently it's rooted in the very dangerous characteristic that should a philosopher, in this case Marx, make a remark off the cuff, possibly slightly sort of off, the whole thing gets poisoned. Now, ideologues know this, and this explains sometimes, the fairly common phenomenon, or someone making a very poor remark, shall we say, on Twitter 20 years ago, and they fish it out and present it. And if that's clever enough, or it's the right situation, they can ruin someone's career, almost destroy their life, because no smoke without fire in this case. That's the way I argue it. Even the slightest flicker, and bingo. It's the same sort of thing in the physical world. I remember years ago, we used to have giant milk tankers coming to a place called Chadwell Heath. In those days, I think it was Unigate. And they used to process milk there. I've forgotten what it was called. Anyway, one day a whole lorry came in and it was crawling with bugs and goodness knows what else. And the reason why is because they hadn't properly sanitized the machinery making this stuff and dispensing it at the milk plant. I think they used hypochlorite or something, stinging your nose. And consequently, the bugs multiplied and bingo. A similar thing happened about the same time. There was a large haulage company, the huge big milk tankers, and they thought it was a clever idea because they had lost a major mineral tank contract. And on these tankers was a screw valve, rather like the one you get in your bathroom tap. You just twiddle it down, you know. And they thought, great, we'll put these tankers onto the milk, a lovely new contract. And the senior management had a strategically ignorant of a detail. Now, good management were an eye for strategic detail. A very small thing, and this was a small thing. It would have cost, I don't know what, pennies compared to the consequence that arose from this blindness. The drivers knew, but people didn't listen to the drivers in those days, and I expect they still listen to them now. And what happened was that the milk tanker had a sort of bathroom tap type of thing to let the mineral stuff come and go. And when they converted into milk, the milk was popped in at the top, and they went to where they're going to and unscrewed the taps, and the milk went out to wherever it was going to, yogurt plant or cheese, whatever it was. Well, that worked okay for about a week. And then suddenly they had the most critically serious tainting, and not at just one milk plant, one delivery place, but at several. And I think it was hundreds of thousands of gallons of this stuff had to be written off. And massive cleaning of machinery and God knows what else. Now the reason why was because you don't use screw valves for biological loads. And the reason why is because when you unscrew and screw up, the stem of the valve is not cleaned when you clean out the tank. You can't do it. What you should have used is a thing called a butterfly valve, which sort of is rather like a flat thing on a pivot, but it twists round in the middle of the pipe. So one way the flat is sort of in line with the flow, the other way it blocks it. It pivots the top to the bottom. And when you do one of these butterfly valves, you can clean them. So that simple mistake of not replacing the screw valves with butterfly valves cost well over close to 7 figures. Well, it was, I think about it now. Yeah, it was 7. I had a 5 at the front. I mean, the cost was phenomenal. All because of a simple little bit of ignorance and tiny thing, and understanding that you need to change the valves. So, coming back to this again, ideologues don't have the capacity to observe or listen. Strategic detail is quite beyond them. In fact, indeed, strategic anything is beyond them, because they already know. That's it. So, anyway, the age of reason again. The ideology began to grow in the 19th century with increasing influence, and on into the 20th, and the Russian Revolution. And then you had a government run by ideologues. So And it happened overnight almost. Certainly in political terms, it was very swift. And instead of liberating millions of people in what was later to become Soviet Russia, it made the Tsarists look better than what followed. It was just a disaster. Time, normally, things take time, and if you're going to go from a quasi-medieval arrangement, which is what Russia was until even its end of the Tsarism, the First World War, suddenly that's not going to work. But if it goes over a long time, you can do it. For instance, in Britain, over several hundred years, and the United States didn't go too fast. And then you can gradually nudge it along and you get the result. So there we go. We need to look at this because what we have now is quite a danger in the United Kingdom. We had, until about 15 or 20 years ago, we were fairly going the right way, I think. Still a lot of injustice in society. There's no doubt about that. And I think a fair deal of racism, but nothing equivalent to the United States. And then suddenly we imported what was it was political poison from the United States. And there was propaganda later. US aid, for instance, kept Stonewall going. Once it lost its money with the arrival of Trump, love him or hate him, he cut off his money supply. Stonewall suddenly lost a lot of its money. And consequently, it was no longer the sort of wunderkind, the go-to place for virtue signalers in the establishment. That stopped. But with Burnham coming, he's very much of that mould. I think he's going to make the cost of borrowing will suddenly go spike through the ceiling, and the government won't be able to pay debt or pay for things by just maxing out the credit cards anymore. And then what will happen, as I say, is that I think we will be forced, this country will be forced, to give away, in effect, a large chunk of the value of our fracking resources and our oil and gas. It's going to be a very, very bitter experience. And I think the Americans will be the ones who insist we do this. And they're going to profit from it. The ideologues brought us to this stage. And it's not just Labour. The Tories were equally infected. The difference is that the Tories at least had some contact and understanding of basic economics. The ideologues in the Labour Party, the likes of Burnham, deliberately ignore economics because they think this sort of particular economic belief in the markets and so on is the cause of the problems. So if you can solve things by getting rid of the cause and acting, as it were, against markets, controlling markets, like for instance the idea of price control. It's been tried a lot of times. It doesn't really work. In wartime, it does have a good effect to an extent because it can ensure that the wealthy people don't sort of suffer from the hardship of rationing, whilst the poor people do, which is a dreadfully divisive phenomenon. But with rationing, at least, it sort of brought a form of equality which reduced potential division and upset in society when a nation's trying to fight for its survival. That makes sense. And in a way, if you didn't do that, then quite frankly, the establishment will be under hiding and the war may well lost because people say, well, if war enables the wealthy to live the high life whilst we're living in difficult times, that's very poor news. There was a famous newspaper picture, I think, when the Café Royal was bombed in the Second World War, of bottles of champagne being used to cool down the limbs of wounded wealthy people in all in grand night attire, and that went down like a lead balloon. I'm surprised that the censor didn't get them to stop that from coming out. So yeah, even then there was tensions. So now we're faced with a bit of a sort of crash landing, a sudden desire of the Labour Party to accelerate change faster than legacy society can handle. Now, I don't believe that change is for the good anyway, but trying to do it at speed will guarantee that a major political change. I really hope that I'm wrong about the national assets being flogged off like a fire sale to foreign interests, and this country will be reduced to civility. It's really, really tragic. But anyway, there you go. A bit gloomy today. I think things will improve, but the basic problem is to do with the mindset from the age of reason and the inability to appreciate the importance of significance of respecting contradiction, and when you're discussing working things out with other people, to have the capacity, if only temporarily in that process, to suspend the law of non-contradiction by, this is the paradox, according sense to the word contradiction, so you can make sense out of logic and use it and be rational. So the ability to reason, which is at the heart of solving all problems, including very serious political ones, must accommodate that. Ideology, on the other hand, loathes contradiction. Consequently, it loathes reason. And, more frightening in a way, it loathes democracy. These are interesting times. I think we're going to get through this because the national temperament is going the right way. And I think there's sufficient numbers of people with sufficient sense to see that there is a way out. And I think quite a few might see profit in that route, which will help. Anyway, there we go. It's Monday morning. I hope it's an interest. It's a bit long-winded. And these are interesting times. Bye for now.